This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed effort to convert retreat into advance.
If civilization, that is the elevation of humans, is mankind's greatest achievement, then war must be mankind's worst achievement. And if God put man on this planet to exemplify justice and goodness, then war and weaponry, the organized destruction of others, is an offense against God.
And now, The Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the Books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Welcome to the Edwin Black Show. I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and author of 200 editions in 40 languages in 190 countries worldwide. If you like our show's content, spread the word. You can subscribe for alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. And if you want to support our work, please visit theedwinblackshow.com/support. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and uncensored journalistic independence. Today's episode is sponsored without any preconditions, requests, or stipulations by the just released Google audio book of my international bestseller, IBM and the Holocaust. It was done as part of a special Google Books project. Get it at edwinblack.com/books. Today we welcome guests from across America, including our 4 watch parties in the Villages, Newton, Mass, Chicago, and Tampa Bay. Hello, Harvey. Overseas, I see viewers logged on from, again, Australia. Thank you, New Zealand, Japan, Holland, Sweden, France, Italy, Spain, Guten Tag, Germany, Hungary, Great Britain, Ireland, Canada, Mexico, India, and Israel, plus other countries. If you have a question limited to today's topic, place one short sentence without preamble in Zoom's QA feature. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, is global and fast growing, enjoying many tens of thousands of views. We speak frankly and without tremor to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present, very, very tense, and a future still uncertain. By the way, stay tuned for my special word of wisdom at the very end of the show, just before I sign off. We'll get to our frightening topic, 2033, the war edition, in a few minutes after some brief announcements and then reports from the week. Announcements at the Edwin Black Show and our companion YouTube site. We have just released more compelling and hard-hitting episodes. The most important of these is our recent Turning Point series, Declaring World War J. Parts 1 and 2 are now both live. My appearance tour continues. Next stop in a few days, it's a return to Mexico City for a powerful community-wide 4-event series sponsored by Yad Vashem and that country's extraordinary Museum of Tolerance. Get details of all my appearances from edwinblack.com/events. And let us meet up in your city. Stand tall. I'm coming your way. Finally, I remind my viewers of a terrible website you must know about, publishing the ghoulish videos from October 7th, and this is the war crime documentation Israel will need to prosecute after the war. See it at Hamas-massacre.net, and I regret to inform you it is brutal. Items from the week. I remind everyone that we are now in the midst of World War J, the global war against the Jews, here at home in America and roiling throughout the nations of the world. Now to the bad news, streaming into my office every minute of every day. I have selected just a few. From the Focus Project, we see that the hate festering at colleges has migrated into the K-12 schools. In Connecticut, a father has just described the anti-Jewish harassment his 11-year-old son experienced, such as the taunt, "Hey, I have a fun camp for you. It has great showers, Camp Auschwitz." The boy also heard the taunt, quote, "We must exterminate the Jews." That school did nothing except tell the Jewish student to select a different lunch seat. On the West Coast, we learned that at least 30 Jewish families have requested and received a transfer out of one Oakland, California public school because their children were subjected to anti-Semitic harassment. Such reports are coming in from all over the country. In Canada, where anti-Semitic action is rampant, we have Paramount Fine Foods, owned by a Lebanese Canadian, operating some 40 popular restaurants, publicly declaring that supporters of Israel are not welcome. Quote, "We don't need your money," exclamation mark, close quote. At the Fulton Street subway stop in Manhattan, we see a metal structure engraved with the words "Free Palestine," and underneath it, quote, "Every Zionist shot." We hear from London a warning by a well-known commentator. I'm going to read it to you. Quote, "Make no mistake, all the signs are here now. British Jewish life will be squeezed out of the UK. There is not a single institution, from the courts to the schools, in which anti-Semitism has not firmly embedded itself. People can publicly call for jihad in our streets, and the police protest their innocence. Celebrities openly promote the propaganda of radical Islamic terror groups. Opposing a key element of Jewish identity is now being equated with a progressive human rights stance. It has become fashionable to dislike 90% plus of Jews. We have heard these words. That was all a quote. We have heard these words before from Brussels and even Berlin. But can it be true in London as well? To find out, we get a 3-minute situation report from our contributing editor, Zalmi Unsdorfer, chairman of Likud-UK. Zalmi, is it true or is it an exaggeration? Take the screen.
Good evening from London. Yes, I think it is true to some extent. It's not true in terms of Jewish daily life here. I've got to take this back to October 7th, and there were some very hairy moments from October 7th onwards, both here and in Europe. Everyone remembers that disgusting scene at the airport in Dagestan, which was literally the most horrific piece of I can't even describe it any longer. You've all seen it. There were times when Jewish schools were being had red paint thrown on them, and this kind of thing. That has substantially died down. What really has taken hold here is a feeling that the police have lost control of the streets. They're not prepared to confront these Islamists mobs. We know we have about 250,000 or 225,000, I would imagine, Jews in the United Kingdom, and about 2.5 million Muslims. We have an election year this year. There are large Muslim communities up in the Midlands, in the middle of England. Therefore, politicians are having to kind of like bend the knee and take the knee, or whatever the expression is, to make sure that they get the relevant votes in the probably October general election. So I think what they say in public and what they believe in private are very, very different. And the same thing goes for America. When you see Blinken walking in, laying down the law to Netanyahu, it's not because he believes that we should hold our punches in Gaza at all. Nobody in power or in the military believes that should happen. But unfortunately, we're dealing with an election cycle in the United States, an election cycle in the United Kingdom, a European election in the European Parliament this year, and everyone is pandering to their very large Muslim majority votes. So on the streets, for the regular Jew, it has eased up substantially in the last couple of months. Yes, he's right. David Collier, a great columnist, a great investigative journalist, and he's right that there is deep-rooted anti-Semitism in the country. And my own member of parliament here in Finchley, who occupied the office of the late Margaret Thatcher, who was the member of parliament for Finchley and Golders Green, had to stand down because his office was firebombed, and he received constant threats against him. One last thing I would mention from London, and that is one of our greatest advocates, Douglas Murray. I'm sure you all know Douglas Murray, amazing journalist and writer, advocate for Israel. Has spent most of the time in the Gaza Strip or with the troops. Had an appearance for the Technion, the Israeli Technion University, in the Apollo Theatre in London this week. And the Islamists threatened to disrupt and threatened the young staff members of the Apollo Theatre, and as a result of that, the venue had to be cancelled at the last minute. This is what we are having to deal with in this country, but at the end of the day, it's not just our problem. It is the ordinary British and the ordinary American Judeo-Christian people who've suddenly woken up and to see what has literally materialized, been allowed to come into their country. America still has the chance to redeem itself, but I think Europe is a lost case.
So your representative was forced to resign because he was just firebombed, and the Apollo Theater could not proceed with a Technion session because the staff refused to work because either they didn't want to or they were intimidated. Could you have envisioned this 6 months ago?
No, although I must say that there have been cases, even years ago, when Islamists had targeted Jewish events. This is what we live with. At the end of the day, we do live in the Galut, and this is the way it is. We're not supposed to be comfortable in the diaspora. We're supposed to be coming to Israel, and I look forward to going back there very, very soon.
Well, I'll be coming to Israel soon. I'll be coming to your house even sooner. So thank you very much, Zalmi. Now let's get to the Hamas war. Israel is struggling to win an almost impossible war, dismantling a terrorist infrastructure constructed to exist both above ground in ordinary-looking buildings while being completely connected below ground to terror tunnels and a terrorist infrastructure. The Hamas tunnel system is at least 750 kilometers long, with more than 800 access shafts. That's 3 times the size of the London Underground that Zalmi takes. There are few, if any, innocent civilians in Gaza. I've said it before, I'll say it again, but there are non-combatants. These people are being moved by Israel from one zone to another through humanitarian corridors as Israel dismantles the terror and attack society created in Gaza over the past decades. Yet the Biden administration continues to harass Israel with demands to both speed things up and slow things down. Jew hatred and Israel hatred is rampant in the Biden administration, especially at the State Department. For example, and this is just one example, Sylvia Yacoub has very publicly accused Biden personally of complicity to commit genocide. Here is one of many examples from her recent social media. Quote, "Hey, POTUS, so long as you keep showing absolute support for Netanyahu, you continue to support genocide." Close quote. She has added, quote, "Your rhetoric and approach from day one has resulted in the deaths of thousands. There is so much blood on your hands," period, close quote. Yet Ms. Yacoub remains a Middle East foreign policy officer in the section of the State Department which forges Israel policy. At this very time, at this very moment, the State Department is trying to force the creation of a Palestinian state, an insane idea that, if successful, is dooming the region to endless bloody wars that would rage from street to street and house to house across Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and actually every other corner of Israel. Of course, as we've been saying for months, now generally accepted, Biden doesn't care about the Palestinian state as much as he cares about the Michigan state. Michigan Arabs have coalesced into a tightly unified voting bloc of 150 to 200,000 persons, and they have repeatedly and vocally promised Biden they will never vote for him in November, even if it means ceding the swing state to Donald Trump. Long lists of locally elected Arab American office holders, such as the mayors and state legislators, just days ago refused to meet Biden Representative Julie Chavez Rodriguez, insisting they will not discuss the elections while the Gaza war rages. White House emissaries have been denied meetings throughout the Michigan Arab American community. Top Biden aides will try again today, probably within an hour. A very senior entourage has been dispatched to Michigan, including Samantha Power and Principal Deputy National Security Advisor Joe Feiner, and a White House liaison to the American Muslim community, Mazem Basrawi. Biden needs to deliver something to assuage the Stop Biden movement. The plan now is to try somehow to recognize a Palestinian state, which would be illegal in view of the internationally accepted Oslo Accords. The United States would plan to arm it, finance it, pay for a global population transfer, and ultimately, if the election goes the wrong way here in the United States, de-recognize Israel, and then watch the next and perhaps final war against the Jews to break out. And so we have the absolute vile spectacle of Blinken standing in Tel Aviv and declaring that Israel cannot use the fact that they were indeed dehumanized on October 7th, quote, as a license to dehumanize others. That's a chutzpah. They think such comments will play well in Dearborn and Detroit. What a nerve. The Biden administration has abundantly funded the Palestinian Authority, which is now paying bonus money to the October 7 murderers, as they have for years in the Pay to Slay program that I wrote about in my book, Financing the Flames. It's okay for the Palestinian Authority to publicly endorse the Hamas massacre, call Jewish feet filthy should any Jew wish to ascend the Temple Mount to the Holy of Holies, train its population to randomly stab Israelis, run them over with cars, call them roaches, promise an apartheid Judenrein Jew-free Palestine if they ever get a state. That's somehow worthy of millions of dollars in foreign aid. And if we add some roasted babies, beheaded grandmas, raped music lovers, and 100+ hostages, the extra special reward is a state of your own. But if the Jews in their agony, an agony which will pass down from generation to generation, like a knife that cannot be withdrawn from the Jewish soul, if the Jews fight back and refuse to jump real quick now into the boxcar or the shooting pit, then the very fact that we are fighting back, the very fact that we stand tall like every other people at this moment on the planet, from Ukraine to the United States, then we must be accused in our own national home in this moment of dehumanization, with dehumanizing ourselves. You're going to accuse us? During World War II, the American government proliferated the abbreviation LYB, that is little yellow bellies, to dehumanize Japanese. That's where the term yellow belly comes from. And to add injury to insult, we moved our Japanese American citizens into concentration camps. In Berlin, General Eisenhower promulgated the non-fraternization policy, where no German could be spoken to or greeted with any respect, and no one could even shake the hand of a German in any business or operational meeting. I could go on, but that would be a totally another show. Shame on you for victimizing the victim, so your words can play well, not in Peoria, but play in Detroit, and also on the pages of Arab American newspapers and on the airwaves of Al Jazeera. But this time, this first time in modern history, the Jews will fight back. Justice will be done on the battlefield and also in the courtroom. We're going to prosecute and litigate against the reincarnated Nazis of our day. You have heard of the many lawsuits against the colleges. They're being filed once a week, and we'll have plenty more. There are also lawsuits being pursued against Hamas and their Iranian sponsors. Here to tell us about one is distinguished anti-terrorist litigator and a former president of B'nai B'rith. I give you my friend, Richard Heideman. Take it, Richard.
Edwin, thank you very much. And to all of you, let's focus on the fact that this is indeed a multi-pronged war. It's not a new war. And it's a multi-pronged war. It's on the ground, it's in the sea, it's in the air, but it's also in the airwaves. And the court of public opinion is not friendly. The courts themselves may be the only place where we can achieve a semblance of justice in a reasonably near term, in an impartial way. The United States Congress has enacted laws over the last decades that allow American victims of terror to bring actions against either state sponsors of terror. That means countries that are on the State Department list of state sponsors of terror, currently 4, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Syrian Arab Republic, North Korea, and Cuba. In addition, under the Anti-Terrorism Act, American victims of terror can bring actions because they've been, God forbid, killed or injured. And under the law, American victims who have parents, spouses, children, siblings who are also American victims also have access to the courts. The issue of using the courts in matters of perpetrated terror by Hamas and other designated foreign terror organizations is not new. Our law firm, Heideman, Noodleman and Kalick, PC, in Washington, D.C., has been active bringing cases for more than 20 years. Libya was sued. Gaddafi was sued for having sponsored the Abu Nidal terror organization, which committed the Rome and Vienna airport attacks, committed the Egypt Air hijacking on a plane going from Athens to Cairo. We sued Libya. We also sued Syria. Libya, as you may recall, at the time of George W. Bush being president, entered into an agreement with the United States, pushed by all of us private lawyers, not our firm alone, but all of the firms working together, and actually paid $1.5 billion that was paid out to victims and their families. Let's talk about Hamas. Hamas has been found to have sponsored the Second Intifada, to have committed numerous attacks in in the Second Intifada, the period of 2000 to 2005. Lawsuits are still ongoing from that period, but American victims of terror have been standing up. We've been bringing cases against Iran and Syria as state sponsors of terror repeatedly over these decades. Some of those cases already have resulted in judgments. Other cases are ongoing as we speak. Let's talk about October 7th. It's a game changer. None of us have ever seen such barbarism, such heinous attacks of beheadings and rapings and burnings like we've seen. And if you haven't seen the video, you need to see the video. The 47-minute video made available through the Embassy of Israel. It's confidential. I'm not permitted to comment on it. You need to see it for yourself. And there's a website that you've been told about by Edwin. You need to go and take a look, because each picture is worth thousands of words. Let's talk about what's upcoming. Law firms like ours are in the process of filing lawsuits. We've just been engaged by American victims of terror to bring actions against Iran and Syria. Those are being drafted now. We've been engaged to evaluate the evidence against North Korea, because there's evidence of North Korea sponsoring Hamas. We're going to look at Cuba as well. But on the anti-terrorism side, that means, again, under the Anti-Terrorism Act, that means against non-state sponsors. We have to stop the funding that runs to Hamas. It comes largely, not exclusively, through charities that are Hamas fronts, including charities in the United States, 501c3s that give tax receipts, tax deductions to American contributors, and those monies head over to Hamas. It was just reported that even since October 7th, Hamas is receiving something like $10 or $12 million every period. Money changers are moving money. Charities, as I said, are moving money. And it's more than just in suitcases from Qatar. It includes money moving from banks. The law has to change in order to allow more actions against banks to deter their conduct. Let me close with this. It is essential for victims of terror and their families to stand up against this terror. It is essential for every American, for every freedom-loving person around the world to stand up against terror. Let's remember, it's Hamas terror that took these lives. Hamas, a designated foreign terror organization. Everybody's shouting about a ceasefire. Everybody's properly worried about the lives and future of every hostage and their families. How come we don't hear a call for Hamas to surrender, for Hamas to put down their weapons, for Hamas to close the tunnels, for Hamas to let everybody home, for Hamas to change its ways? They have no interest in that. Their total interest is embedded in their charter, and their charter calls for the annihilation of Israel. And included within their definition of Israel is the Jewish people around the world. We've all been threatened, and our friends have been threatened, regardless of their religion. If they are our allies, we are all together. And as it was said by famous people during and about the Shoah, when they're done coming for the Jews, I'm paraphrasing, they will come for us. Let's all work together to seek justice and accountability for every sponsor of terror. States, organizations, charities, and individual contributors. We must put a stop to it. Thank you, Edwin.
Well, that was thrilling, and I thank you for every word that you said. Let us know how much you're going to be asking for, who are the defendants that you plan, if you can release that information, and when do you plan to file?
The first lawsuit will be filed in the very near future, and it'll be against both Iran and against Syria. Because by suing Iran and Syria as state sponsors of terror, since we have so many experts that have already testified, so many court decisions about them having funded and sponsored Hamas, we will present to the federal courts a motion once we've served the Iran and Syria, a motion for entry of liability and entry of a damages award. This will allow the American victims to qualify to be included in the congressionally enacted U.S. Victims of State-Sponsored Terror Fund. This fund was not originally created with taxpayer money. It was created taking money through the Department of Justice from banks and other entities that participated in nefarious activities. But Congress a year ago allocated $6 billion to that fund for certain qualifiable victims. So the first lawsuit will be here in Washington, D.C., the United States District Court for the District of Columbia against Iran and Syria. The other lawsuits will be brought where we have jurisdiction in U.S. courts over American entities, corporations, charities, and others. And we're looking hard, as we should be looking hard, at new litigation against Qatari entities, because there is no question Qatar itself has acted in the most duplicitous way. Qatar itself has funded Hamas and then holds itself out as the savior of the hostages. There has to be accountability. That's what our courts are for, and that's what we'll be doing.
Well, thank God you're doing this, and we're going to be following your work. Now, I'd like to say to our viewership that you may not recognize Richard Heideman right now on this show, but the fact is, he was on the very first episode of the Edwin Black Show. And this is season 5, and he was on the very first episode along with Nathan Lewin. We remember him well. We're going to be following your work. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
And now for my monologue on today's topic, the latest in our 2033 series, that is 1 decade in the future. This time we focus on the frightening prospect of war in the next decade. If civilization, that is the elevation of humans, is mankind's greatest achievement, then war, the destruction of humans, must be mankind's worst achievement. And if God put man on this planet to exemplify justice and goodness as a human manifestation, then war and weaponry, the organized destruction of others, is an offense against God. We are not talking about mere killing, as Cain did unto Abel, because there was bad blood between the brothers. You may see Genesis 4 in the Bible, and in the Holy Quran find the 2 brothers as Habil and Kabil, and even in the Sumerian text find the story of Inanna and Dumazid. It is a pan-human story, but for war, we speak not of murder by stone in hand between brothers, but the magnification of that transgression. War is not merely brother against brother. It is in fact magnified to tribe against tribe, which in later centuries became empire against empire, and in recent centuries became nation against nation. It is conquest, the taking of land, wealth, or social order, which means it is an act of overcoming another society. I've studied the history of weapons in war. I know that for every new weapon created, a new defense and better weapon has been created. And for every defense, a means of defeat has been conceived. The bow and arrow, the shield and armor, the man on a horse, the man with a long pike. Against the wall, we see the ladder. Against the taller wall, we see the taller siege engine. And throughout history, even going back to antiquity, we see the tunnel to drive beneath the wall. Show me the gun, and I will show you the Kevlar. Show me the airplane, and I will point to anti-aircraft. Show me the anti-ship missile, and I will show you the Aegis Gatling gun. For centuries, monarchs have mobilized ordinary citizens to race toward each other with swords. The first empire to maintain a professional trained army was Rome. The word decimation is based on the Roman ethic that if a unit failed in its fight, every 10th man would be executed. Deca means 10, decimate. Roman legions were paid 225 denarii and as much as 15,000 denarii per year, but they were also rewarded with the spoils of war. The citizens, the people, and their possessions. World War I was mechanized. Even though it was mainly fought on horseback, automotive machines were introduced. Not just troop transport trucks, but also tanks. The first tanks were thought to be giant water storage units, hence the name tank. World War I was a senseless war, resulting in millions dead, yet not one single expert knows why it was fought. But it so sadly shows how easily man's ingenuity with machines could be used for death and destruction. If World War I was mechanized, World War II was industrialized. The concept of blitzkrieg was incarnated by IBM, which organized Nazi Germany's war and its genocide with punch cards and information technology. IBM executives bragged that they put the Blitz into blitzkrieg. Hitler's mass murder was also industrialized. No longer would we need Ukrainian Cossacks racing through the village swinging their swords. The 20th century showed that victims could be marched into the wilderness to be killed, as was done by the Germans to the Hereros in Namibia and the Turks to the Armenians. Hitler was now able, with IBM technology and super organization, he was able to concentrate the population and industrialize their destruction with shooting pits and gas chambers. So now, after seeing so much nation against nation killing in both our collective recent past and collective painful present, we ask, just what will warfare and weaponry look like 10 years from today? It would be easy for me. I can talk about guns now being perfected, such as the Metal Storm, which combines 36 barrels to shoot an astonishing, ready for it, 1 million bullets per minute. And many of them will be smart bullets. They'll zoom around corners and follow fleeing terrorists down the road to neutralize them. Lasers are now being developed in numerous settings to inexpensively and with astonishing precision neutralize any person, flying object, or threat. Israel has already tested its Iron Beam, which has a 7-mile limit. It hopes to have fleets of them installed on towers, trucks, and naval vessels within 1 to 2 years, and that range will probably double shortly. Autonomous warfare is already here, and within a decade will dominate. We have drones right now, naval vessels right now, airplanes right now, and combat and patrol vehicles right this moment, operating throughout the Middle East and elsewhere, all autonomously. Israel is a leader in this technology. Everyone knows ballistic missiles, which are named for the heavy round ballista that the Roman catapults used to throw. The missile goes on a defined and predictable arc-like route. These have been replaced, however, increasingly with missiles which can loiter and change their route, go up and down and all around. Yet even these unpredictable missiles are now being replaced by hypersonic missiles, which can loiter, change route, and do so at 5 to 25 times the speed of sound, which is 1 to 5 miles per minute. And soon we shall see the theater of warfare go even further as outer space becomes weaponized. The Air Force has been interested in hypervelocity rod bundles, sometimes nicknamed the rods of Thor. These thin, dense tungsten rods would be shot from outer space. This doesn't exist yet, but it would be shot to targets on Earth that would impact at about Mach 24 with the power of a nuclear bomb, but no radiation. It could bust any bunker, no matter how deep. But we have seen that even a high-tech border like Gaza, which was patrolled by every sort of advanced observation method, and even robot vehicles, requires the human soldier on the ground to come in and fight the battle inch by inch. In the end, it will not be robots that fight, but it'll be the school teachers, the dentists, and coffee shop baristas that will have to don the uniform and make the split-second decisions of life and death. This is regardless of the technology. So a decade from now, everything in warfare, yes, will be more automated, more autonomous, more AI-driven, more lethal. But deployment and destruction will still depend upon the greatest weapon of them all, the human mind. Here, the great influencers will come to bear, or shall I say, the great weaponizers, the AI fakes, the human policy, our ability to live with our neighbors, the survival of political systems such as democracy, communism, and totalitarianism, the underlying sperm and egg of warfare. These unpredictable factors shall decide who shall live and who shall die, and where they shall live and die. Nations and national systems, societies and social orders are now being chewed and spit out in new forms that to some will be sweet, but to many will be bitter. Answer that question, and you can predict the future of war in 2033. I left out 99% of everything, and now yield to Jonathan Ruhe, Foreign Policy Chief of JINSA. I believe many do not know about JINSA, which is the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, but this is the #1 24/7, highly proficient and unparalleled organization for understanding and advancing America's national security in the Middle East. Jonathan, take the screen and tell us what you know about the world in the next decade and how warfare will define our world and humanity itself.
Thank you, Edwin. And so looking out 10 years in advance, obviously there's so much we know that we don't know. And as someone who works a lot on Middle East conflict, there's a lot we don't know about what tomorrow may even bring in Gaza or in Yemen or anywhere else around the region. But I would say, given the introductory remarks, a couple things that we can base our expectations and our planning on for what the world looks like 10 years from now and what shape conflict takes is a couple things. And Edwin mentioned this. We have increasing autonomization and the increasing use of drones and other systems that may have a human in the loop somewhere farther back in the kill chain, but which are increasingly able of operating not only by themselves, but with other autonomous systems. And we'll see that taking a number of forms. But at the same time, and in tandem with that, you also see a reversion to, as we talked about, things that are eternal in warfare. You see this in Ukraine with trench warfare running up and down the line of contact between Russia and Ukraine. You see it in Gaza with Hamas's incredible subterranean system, and you see it indeed in what will probably ultimately be a leading driver of determining the outcome of the war in Gaza, aside from the political aspect, but on the battlefield, is the age-old task of taking small infantry units in modern warfare supported by air and artillery power and having them grind away and chew through block by block to seize territory and eliminate an enemy physically. So going forward, you're going to see sort of, I think, parallel progress on both of those. We'll see war continue to go underground. Hamas has given no reason for anybody on the outside looking in to think that digging tunnels does not work. Hezbollah on Israel's northern front has an equally daunting subterranean network that poses both a passive defense, as tunneling always has, but also, as tunneling always has going back millennia, also enables offensive maneuver on the battlefield itself. We're seeing that also in North Korea, and we'll see it across future battlefields and the like. Additionally, on the higher end, we're seeing increased use of autonomization. Really, I think what's not fully appreciated is the first time we really saw an AI-driven battle was in 2021, Israel's conflict with Hamas, because Israel used AI to help sift through an incredible amount of intelligence. They used man-machine teams, but basically Israel had so many sensors deployed on the battlefield that there was no way they had enough people to go through all that information. So they used AI to sort of sift out the wheat from the chaff. And that worked for them incredibly well in target selection and operational warfighting in 2021. And then Hamas unfortunately learned from that, as every adversary always gets a vote, which helps determine and drive forward what warfare looks like in the next round. But the use of AI and also the proliferation of sensors I think is a key determining factor that we've seen in recent years. And going forward, I think will play a bigger and bigger role, not only based on what we've learned in the war in Gaza, but obviously what we're seeing in the war in Ukraine as well. Just almost nothing can move on the battlefield without it being picked up by a cheap and mobile sensor, which then drives another factor, which is the growth of electronic warfare. Again, in Ukraine, we're seeing a cat and mouse game between Ukrainian and Russian forces to use EW, electronic warfare, both for offensive and defensive purposes, driven by this plenitude of sensors. We also saw it in Hamas's attack on October 7th, the use of electronic warfare capabilities to jam, again, these sensors that I mentioned that Israel had and used as a competitive advantage, but also basic communications. I think it's probably one of the things that delayed the IDF's response on that horrible day. One final big key issue I want to point out is, and something that would not have been expected if we were having this conversation in 2014 about what the world looks like 10 years in the future, is the return of this mass industrialization of warfare that Edwin referenced in his comments. We're seeing, I mean, Ukraine war has really brought about a belated realization of this in the West and in NATO, but looking at the conflict we're seeing in the Middle East and its potential to escalate, and then also, let alone the scale of a conflict in the Indo-Pacific, presumably over Taiwan, but any other number of scenarios, is the need for a robust and continually advancing defense industrial base to maintain the munitions output that are needed for these conflicts. Even a relatively contained geographically and sort of small conflict like what we're seeing between Israel and Gaza compared to the war in Ukraine or over Taiwan, even that is incredibly munitions intensive. And I think one thing that hasn't gotten a lot of headlines, for all the stumbling the Biden administration has done on a political level when it comes to supporting Israel, on a material level, they have done an incredible job of giving Israel the munitions it needs to defend itself. And this has been no small task, given the number of air-to-ground munitions, but also even basic things like small ammo the IDF needs to prosecute this conflict. That will only grow massively if and when there is a conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. That's an order of magnitude greater. Obviously, we're seeing in Ukraine a similar thing where both sides have had to not only revive their own defense industrial bases, but spread these out among their allies as well. Russia going to Iran and North Korea for basic munitions, Europe and the United States having to pool resources to try to support Ukraine, and even then running into incredible log jams. So I think that's one thing. Going forward, I don't see anything that will drive that back down, this need for robust, resilient supply chains, not only for the high-end stuff on the AI and sensor-related level, electronic warfare, but on the lower end, things we used to take for granted that in World War II, bullets, shells, even basic spare parts. So I think, in addition to that need for the sheer scale and mass of the firepower and manpower that increasingly seems like it will need to be brought to bear, also just, again, something that shouldn't be overlooked is this importance of the things that are almost eternal in warfare and that continually recur not only from generation to generation, but century to century. The things like, again, just basic, the need for basic well-trained infantry that can operate in small units. And again, things we're seeing like, there's never been a passive defense like digging underground. That was true 3,000 years ago, and safe to say it'll at least be true 10 years in the future. So I'll sort of stop there with the broad observations.
All right. Well, those were great observations. I took a lot of notes, but we have so many questions from, and they're so excellent. I just want to talk about one or two things. There are a lot of tunnels in Lebanon, and a lot of people aren't familiar. They're familiar with the Hamas tunnels. What do you know about the tunnel system in Lebanon?
Great question. So it's probably by necessity not as extensive as what we're seeing in Gaza, but that's a reflection of, as you mentioned, how extensive the subterranean network is in Gaza and how easy it is, relatively speaking, to dig in Gaza. It's basically soft, sandy soil. Doesn't take a lot of manpower or expertise to do it. In the north, in Lebanon, it's rockier, and it's a much more arduous effort. 4 years ago, Israel pretty reliably located all the cross-border incursion tunnels that we saw Hamas have in previous rounds of warfare. So those have probably been neutralized. But within Lebanon itself, Hezbollah has presumably significant, I don't know how many miles, but significant underground tunneling that lets them store munitions to proof them from Israeli airstrikes, and then also to maneuver units defensively within Lebanon. And I would say, even though the tunnel network there is probably not as great as what we're seeing in Gaza, it's in service of the Hezbollah war machine, which is, as I mentioned, order of magnitude greater than even Hamas's formidable capabilities. And it's something that I think when there is the next round of conflict on Israel's northern front, something that I think will come into play at least as much operationally and tactically as what we've seen in Gaza.
All right, we're loaded with questions, Jonathan. So let's start with the watch party in the villages. I think Jonathan knows where the villages are. And they want to know about the bunker buster. Can I talk about the so-called bunker buster? Well, if you're talking about the bunker buster, which I believe is the 56 or 57A/B, also known as the MOP, M-O-P, Massive Ordnance Penetrator. I was actually the first one to break the news that this existed. It was a bunch of years ago. Boeing put it together. At that time, it was done to both go against the Iranian bunkers and the North Korean bunkers. It's still being thought of. They've made many copies of the bunker buster now, but there are other bunker busters, and not all of them rely on the massive weight and velocity. There's a lot more I know about this topic, but I'd rather not discuss it at this moment. The MOP can only be delivered by 2 airplanes right now. It's the B-1 and the B-52. How many MOPs do we have out there, Jonathan?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any open source reliable information on that. But having done a fair amount of work in the past on the idea of potentially giving Israel the MOP, or at least signaling our willingness to do so, and the platforms needed to deliver it, I can say, I mean, the U.S. has enough where, given Israel's need for them, and B, our clear reticence to use them or even brandish them as potential tools of coercion, enough where if they were utilized as part of a sophisticated information operation and also U.S. military preparedness activities, their intended audience could certainly get the message if we wanted to do that. So I think quantity is not a question there. It's the willpower to leverage them as tools of statecraft that's missing.
And remember, if you drop one after another in sequence, you can double and triple the depth of the penetration. And these bombs are not the same as the MOABs, the mother of all bombs.
Correct.
They go out and they cut down everything that is within view. We actually dropped one in Afghanistan under Trump. These are the ones that go straight down and penetrate. Watch party in Newton, Massachusetts. How soon will Iran get a nuclear bomb? Okay, I'll answer that first, but I'd like Jonathan to check me carefully. Iran has got the bomb now. It's unassembled. They're working on 5, but it's possible they're going to have 6 as per their Ahmed project. It's a R-265 shock generator in 2 hemispheres, penetrated on the outside with 5mm grooves filled with PETN, and that's going to make a simultaneous implosion, and that hits a neutron detonator. First, exploding bridge wire, which takes a lot of force and transmits that. And that's what we used in Hiroshima. And then that goes to the neutron initiator. It shoots out 1 neutron, and that causes the chain reaction for the mushroom cloud. This fits into a Shahab 3 missile, which they got plenty of, and it will be exploded 555 meters or 550 meters above ground level, because that's how this thing works. It requires that atmospheric burst, and I would say that they're now in the 90-degree. They're now in the 90-degree accretion of HEU, that's highly enriched uranium, and no one really knows everything because the cameras have been disconnected, but they're going full speed. I have to say that I heard them warn Israel on Gaza 3 times. And in so doing, they fulfilled the Prophet Muhammad's regimen of warning the enemy 3 times before attack. And so I think they're going to have it right quick. And I think that Israel has waited long enough, and something's going to have to be done about it. I really think that although I'm expecting it every day for the last 15 years, it's going to have to be this year. Jonathan.
So I think you and I are in violent agreement. I think I'll put a slightly different twist on arriving at the same conclusion, and agree with everything that had been said about their technical advancement and their capabilities. The bigger, almost more nefarious concern I have is they do effectively have everything you need for the bomb now. My concern is that they don't actually cross the threshold, because everything we've just discussed, the world knows it. They already know how to build the bomb through the Ahmad plan. They have, not only do they have highly enriched uranium at the 60% level, which is 95% of the work and time it takes to cross the threshold to weapons grade, but within the first month, they could have, 5 or 6 weapons. A couple months after that, they could have a total of 10. And then in addition, they've been slowly, almost to the point, the proverbial frog in the slowly boiling pot of water, they've been reducing inspections and stonewalling efforts to get clarity by the IAEA on just how far along they are, that at this point now, they could basically sneak out without us really having reliable ability to detect it. And then to go back to the MOP issue, their program has been going steadily deeper and deeper underground and been proliferating horizontally to the point where, we talk about 10-year timeframes. 10 years ago, neutralizing Iran's nuclear weapons program was a series of strikes against less than a half dozen targets. Today, it would be a full-ranging campaign in the face of even greater Iranian retaliatory capabilities, not just the Shahabs we all think of, but more conventional weapons, like the type they've used to attack our forces in Iraq in retaliation for the Soleimani killing, or what they used to take out Abqaiq in Saudi Arabia the year before that. So for me, yes, everything Edwin said is true. They could have a bomb on short order, and would have, frankly, a small fleet of them. My real concern, though, is that they don't go that far. They don't risk what would finally be sort of a game-changing event that could force the reimposition of UN Security Council sanctions, or finally concerted action to actually deal with this. My concern is they stay in the current gray zone where they are, where they basically, everyone knows they have the bomb and they get the functional equivalent deterrence from that without actually having to detonate a mushroom cloud in the desert to show it.
Okay, so if they decided to put one together tomorrow morning, we've been hearing they're about 7 days away from assembling one if they want to. What do you say?
Yeah, I say that, that wouldn't surprise me. I think the game of trying to pre-guess Iran's moves and intentions is always spotty and difficult. The real concern, I think, is they would be able to have a bomb together on pretty short notice. The key concern is not how quick, but is it faster than we could reliably detect it and react to neutralize it? And I think on the latter question, the answer is clearly yes. And go to think back about, we all saw Oppenheimer last summer. There's the Trinity test in the desert. That was a Nagasaki bomb. The Hiroshima bomb, that model didn't need to be tested in order to know its viability.
All right, thank you. There's a lot more we can talk about this, and we'll have another show on the bomb one day soon. The watch party in Chicago. What is the defense for a nuclear bomb? Well, I spoke about a defense for all sorts of weapons. I spoke about the shield, and I spoke about the pike, and I spoke about the Aegis anti-missile, Sea-Whiz close-in Gatling gun and all that. But I should have said there's no defense for a nuclear bomb that hits. The best defense is to have it not hit one way or another. I should also remind people that we had a show on nuclear bombs, and we exploded 800 to 1,000 of them in the Las Vegas area as test bombs. So we've had bombs here, but I can assure you, most of the bombs in this world are not regulated. They're under 1 megaton. So if they're 990 kilotons, they're not going to be regulated, and it would be a scenario of death and destruction that we could not calculate, and that is why it's essential that these weapons of mass destruction, that's why they're called that, may not be deployed. Jonathan.
I agree. In the ideal scenario in this case, which is Iran puts 1 nuclear warhead on 1 Shahab-3 and lobs it at Israel, by itself, Israel's advanced air and defense network could reliably shoot that down. But that's not what's going to happen. In the case where with Iran with a nuclear weapon, it would be a Shahab-3 mixed in with a larger salvo of conventional missiles to overwhelm and oversaturate those air defenses. But to Edwin's point, there is no reliable defense against a nuclear weapon. That's what makes them weapons of mass destruction, what makes them so horrifying. We kind of found a way to make it work with mutually assured destruction in the Cold War. But that was, that happened to work for a couple of decades. It's no guarantee of its continued future efficacy. And I would just add, I see a worrying trend in the Biden administration, not explicitly, but to shift from the idea of preventing a nuclear Iran to trying to contain the fallout, no pun intended, of a nuclear Iran, and to sort of assume, well, containment worked in the Cold War, why wouldn't it work against Iran? There's a million reasons why that wouldn't be the case. And so, yes, I agree that there is no reliable defense against a nuclear weapon.
I should also say that people like Jonathan and I are constantly talking about a Shahab-3 missile and a warhead, and the 265 shock generator is designed to fit into the nose cone. But this is all in the realm of miniaturization. If you just want to make this bomb the size of a Volkswagen Bug, you can put it in a container. It doesn't need to be 90%. In fact, the Hiroshima bomb, correct me if I'm wrong, was 88%.
I think even lower, yeah.
That was even lower. And so you could actually send this over in a UPS truck at the border, or some sort of a cargo ship out in the Mediterranean, and it would still be detonatable. It's just a matter of size. Susanna from Grand Rapids, Michigan, wants to know about the Chinese infiltration from the southern border. And she's bringing up a lot of stuff about FBI Director Christopher Wray, saying that the Chinese have been into our national infrastructure for years. This is very worrying to me. I'm reminded of the Chinese militarist who said deception is the first rule of war. We all remember that deception has been used continuously throughout warfare. It's not just a Trojan horse with the guys climbing out of the belly of the horse. For heaven's sakes, World War II started when the Germans faked an attack at the Polish border radio station. And there were many other cases of falsity, not limited to what happened at the Gaza fence last October. So now we have a scenario where Israel, and I now have a note from one of my producers that little boy only had 80% enrichment. That's even lower. So if you're going 80%, you could do that in 10 minutes based on where they are now. So if the Chinese have been slowly getting into our water stations, our electric grids, our essential infrastructure by using their computer attack teams. And if we've got 35,000 military-aged men coming up from the border, and each one has paid like $35,000 to the cartel with the permission of the Chinese government. They're all carrying nice, expensive Tumi luggage pieces, and we already know about the Chinese police stations, which have been peppered around. I think that when the time comes for Taiwan to be invaded, which would give China control of the microchip field, about 82%. When that time would come, America would not be able to respond if we were crippled by non-military means, such as destroying our infrastructure, our ability to communicate, our grid system. Jonathan, what do you think about this Chinese threat?
So I'll start off with a caveat that I'm by no means a China expert, certainly, but I think what we're seeing, and I've worked in the national security field long enough to know that our adversaries certainly aren't afraid to copy one another. I think what China is doing here is sort of seeding, SEEDING, the battlefield in a way that we saw the Russians do in Crimea before they took over. I mean, basically, it's a lot of winning the battle before you have to fight it, getting inside certainly our infrastructure networks, our cyberspace, and basically doing things to sort of weaken America through our soft underbelly rather than go straight at our iron claws. And so, my concern with the Chinese is, unfortunately, our adversaries are pretty sophisticated and intelligent, and they realize, the easiest way to rally Americans against China is for them to do the overt things that we expect all our enemies to do. I think the ultimate example in recent memory is obviously, other than what Hamas did on October 7th, is what Putin did in February of 2022, which is that's what you expect the supervillains, we expect your adversary to do, is launch a conventional invasion, conduct essentially a pogrom in the case of Hamas. I think the Chinese, unfortunately, their goal when they do actually invade Taiwan is to have weakened us in much more subtle ways to inhibit our response, and to do that long before. And so I think everything you described, I think fits with that larger piece. And again, going back also to what you mentioned about Iran not needing 90% to miniaturize a bomb and put it in a warhead. To our audience, if there's a book, if you need to read something to keep you awake at night, America's Achilles heel is a good one, because it talks a lot about how, yes, America has a world-class military that can deploy anywhere around the world. That's not what our adversaries target. They target our soft underbelly. They target the border. They target our open society. They target our general intention as Americans is to, not assume the worst of people. And unfortunately, the Chinese are becoming very, very well schooled at that.
And when you mentioned the Russian pre-advance on Ukraine, I was thinking, of course, the little green men who were infiltrating the border without any insignia. And so we seem to have the same thing with the Chinese. I'm going to be very rapid now because we've got lots of questions and we don't have enough time to answer them. Here's a question from Gerald in Miami about so-called dehumanized soldiers. These are soldiers that he's referring to in his long question, who are made chemically to not fear battle. So they won't be robot soldiers, but they might be robotic men. I will just say that the shock troops of the Third Reich used barbiturates. It's not known by most, but they received drugs and they were crazed and they didn't need to sleep. And many of the Hamas crazies who committed these manslaughters and murders and rapes were on a similar type of barbiturate. And so there is a move afoot in the military to make the next breed of soldier impervious to disease and resistant to sense of fear by the way they give certain drugs. Do you have 30 seconds to add to that, Jonathan?
I would just say it's interesting that this is continually something militaries are trying to resolve, because they, talking to military leaders, they'll say everyone in that position as a soldier gets scared, the good soldiers know how to respond to it and how to go through that because they are human. And we saw, as you mentioned, with the Pervitin, with the Wehrmacht, and then with the Hamas soldiers, I think it's a one more way to try to think of a wonder weapon to win a war. And as we've always seen, by themselves, those never achieve their goals.
All right, here's Melanie in Jacksonville. She wants to know what will be the role of rape in the next decade in war. Well, let me just say that rape has always been a weapon of both war and warfare. I can tell you that, and my friend Jonathan here will testify that the Pakistan war that resulted in the creation of Bangladesh was organized rape of much of the female populace. I just read that in the Hamas attack, which had a lot of rape, one woman, I'm sorry to say, I apologize to my listeners, was raped 67 times. They found 67 different types of sperm in this person. And a 13-year-old was just given an abortion because she's already been found to be pregnant. I think that that what Hamas did, and the fact that Hamas has promised to repeat it time after time, and it is assuming the dimensions. This is something I'm going to say that they don't understand in Washington, called the strong horse, that in the Arab world, that they see that this is tremendously demoralizing. They will do this more and more. So I think that rape will remain a prevalent part of warfare, just like hypersonics and laser operations.
Unfortunately, I find myself in agreement with you again. We've seen sort of two types of sexual violence in warfare. One is the intentional, systematized use of it, like we saw with Hamas on October 7th, and like we've seen in almost any time the Russian military goes anywhere. Then you also see it in another way as a byproduct of the anarchy that attends every instance of warfare throughout society. And sadly, I see no reason either of those will go away in the future.
Yeah, Russia, as we both know, raped almost every woman in Berlin from 8 to 80. We've covered that on a different show. Here's a note from Jeanette in Dallas. I don't understand, what is Israel's pillow bomb? I'll answer that for us, Jonathan. When Israel goes into some of these tunnels, instead of exploding it, which takes down a lot of the infrastructure above, they explode a giant pillow, and it fills the bomb and makes it worthless. Is that correct, Jonathan?
That's certainly better than I could have explained it, but it gets to the point where Israel's tried almost everything under the sun at this point to try to deal with those tunnels, and they're still having to innovate to try to find new ways. And this is but one example. Yes. All
right, we're going to take two more questions. This is from Wes, one of our favorites on the West Coast, and he said, "Can you comment on whether or the amount of precision-guided bombs used by Israel and Gaza as opposed to just dumb bombs?" What do you say, Jonathan?
So I can't comment with any total accuracy, but to give a general sense of the scale, Israel is using thousands upon thousands of precision-guided munitions. They used more PGMs, as they're called, in the first month of their Gaza operation after October 7th than we used in an average year of the highest intensity warfare against ISIS. There's a PGM shortage, frankly, worldwide. It's not just an Israeli problem. It's not just an American problem. The U.S. has been doing its best to replenish Israel's PGM supplies, but those have always been in short supply, given that Israel is constantly at a high operational tempo using those things. So they have had to resort to dumb bombs to fill those gaps. I would say, however, I've seen a lot of this in the discourse, people saying, well, every time Israel uses a dumb bomb, that's a war crime. That couldn't be further from the truth. The usage of the bomb itself has nothing in and of itself to do with how the targeting is done in accordance with the laws of armed conflict. I would say it behooves the United States to keep supporting Israel with precision guided munitions because it enables Israel to conduct its operations more effectively, more quickly, and with lower collateral damage, all while remaining within the confines of the law of armed conflict.
And I should also add that my contacts in Israel have explained to me that they used dumb gravity bombs as infrequently as possible because of the danger of killing Israeli soldiers and civilians just next to the perimeter. So if you're going to use a dumb bomb, you're basically killing your neighbors. So they use them as little as possible. Here's one question here from Steve in Century City. Do the three satellites launched by Iran likely presage an orbiting satellite bomb, great for projecting threats to the West, whether it works or not? So what do you know about a satellite bomb and Iran's launching these three orbital satellites?
So without being a space weapons expert, I would say that having looked at Iran's space launch vehicle program that goes back more than 10 years now, it seems to serve two purposes. The primary technical one is to give them the ability eventually to build an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of threatening the United States, because in order to get lob one of those missiles all the way to the continental U.S., you have to be able to get it out of the atmosphere. That's always been my understanding. I'm willing to be proven wrong on that, but I think that's Iran's primary purpose with the Space Launch Vehicle program. And then also it's a prestige program that shows that Iran, they have pretensions of being a world-class cyber power, a world-class space power. And so it serves those ends as a prestige project as well, and a not so thinly veiled threat, not only to the Middle East, which they can currently threaten with missiles, but also Europe and eventually the United States.
You don't think they have some kind of rods of Thor growing out there, do you?
I don't want to discount it, but it would be news to me.
Okay, so listen, I deeply regret that we are out of time because I'm afraid I was enjoying this conversation a little too much. So hold for my closing word of wisdom just 1 minute away. But first, I want to thank my esteemed guests, Zalmi in London, Richard in Washington, and Jonathan also in Washington. I also want to thank my talented international team, including Eve in New Jersey, Wes in San Francisco, Martin in Detroit, and Luka in Serbia, as well as many others in numerous additional cities around the world. My team, each of them is comprised of very dedicated people. I and we all owe them. I'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks. It'll be live from Mexico City. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go to the edwinblackshow.com/support. Keep me independent. You want to hear me in person? Watch my website for events. I'm in Mexico City in a couple of days. Consult my events page at edwinblack.com. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the USA or any Amazon, Walmart, Apple, Google, or Kobo platform in 190 countries across this roiling, toiling, boiling planet, where you can find any of my 200 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, soon to be a major Hollywood blockbuster. God should grant that there's no more actor strikes. And if you want an autographed copy, hit my personal, newly redesigned website, thank you, Wes, edwinblack.com, and click books. Get access alerts to participate live in future shows. At the edwinblackshow.com, you'll see a much enhanced and exquisitely produced version of this show and prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at the Edwin Black Show. Click the notification button if you would, like thousands, tens of thousands of others have. You will love them. We put new ones up each week, produced by a bold international crew. Follow me at that thing on X. It's Edwin Black Book, and at Facebook, also Edwin Black Book. Remember, today's episode was sponsored without any preconditions, requests, or stipulations by the just released audiobook of IBM and the Holocaust. And now for my closing word of wisdom. There is only one ultimate weapon to defeat war. It's peace. I'm zooming out, everyone. Bless you.